Jai Baba, Meherana. I'm here in Meherabad in India, of course, and I've been twice to Meherana, and once to one of their wonderful Sahavas, and I just loved it because it was in California, which is where I grew up, and California is a really fun place for me. It was my childhood. I lived right across the state. It looked the same, and it was full of Baba's love and care, and very informal, which is the thing I loved about it. It was real Californian, you might say. So all of you who've been to Meherana, just Jai Baba to you all, and I hope you're relaxed as we can be right now. It was in February, I think, or maybe March, I think it was probably February, that Ralph Brown, who's a brother of mine for many years in India, he wrote me an email and asked me to give a talk for the Meherana virtual Sahavas. And you know, I'm not a big one for long-term speaking, and he gave me 50 minutes, but just kind of tossed it off. And so I kind of agreed. I thought, oh, that's in May, and this is February. That's a long time away. I'll think of something. And so somehow I said yes. Now, years ago in India, Ralph had written up this whole play, I think with maybe Gary, or they had come up with this play that the Mandali came and watched. It was in the Nagar Center, I think. And it was Ralph's style, where there weren't lines for the actors. There was just, people just, that there were scenarios. It had something to do with Romeo and Juliet, and it was hysterical, and the audience loved it. The Mandali loved it. But anyway, my part in that was a bag lady. And one of my favorite acting roles that I ever had was to be a bag lady. So I found all that really fun. And so I thought I was going to give this talk and all. And then I found out 2 weeks ago that people who were also giving a talk in this virtual Sahavas of Meherana was Ursula and Rick. And when I heard that, I mean, those are big hitters. I mean, they met Baba, you know, and then I really felt like a bit of a bag lady for this one because, oh my Lord, coming after them, it was like, oh boy. Anyway, I'm ready to go forward with what I can give. And these are all based on my own experiences, not on what you all experienced anyway, it's not on things I heard about, it's actual, I experienced these things. And what they are, what I'm starting out with is just the mandali and vignettes of the kind of naturalness that in a way that surprised us when we first came to India to see the mandali, who were so natural and so different, and it was, you know, for newcomers, it was really a surprise. So I have some memories of that. And I want to start with something that Adi Sr., Adi said to me when Eric and I moved to stay at Meherabad. And Adi said something so wonderful. He said, what can I say? You know, Adi, he said it first in Urdu, and then he went off with the big gestures, and Adi was so amazing. And he said, what can I say of the beloved sublime? He said, I asked for water, he gave me wine. And it was really true. We came here asking for water, well, we didn't even know what we get here. And Baba gave us the wine of his love and experience living here. So anyway, I'm going to start in with Mehera because, you know, her naturalness was really the thing that amazed me. And when I first came to India in 1971, Mehera would sit in her porch and she couldn't say Baba's name without crying. And I mean, she was so brave to sit out there, and there were men and women sitting before her, not many, just a few, but we were sitting in front of her, and she was trying to tell us stories, but it was so hard for her because she'd start to cry. Just his name would make her cry. And when we saw that, we were like, now, we realized that we had never encountered or imagined grief of the level that Mehera experienced 2 years after Baba dropped his body. I mean, to have grief like that, you know, that you couldn't say his name 2 years later without crying. And she didn't mean to, she tried to restrict herself, but it was very hard for her. And when we came again the next year, she was still crying. But I think a year later, Eric and I came again. And on that occasion, I remember on the veranda, Virginia Small, I don't know if you met Virginia Small, but she was something else. And she was old enough to be a friend in a certain way with Mehera, you know, and Virginia, because of her age, she just assumed they were friends, and Mehera just reached out to Virginia too, you know, so they were, we won't say pals, but they were friends, definitely. And Virginia could get away with a lot because of her age and because of her relaxed. She was also relaxed, like Mehera. And I remember one day, Mehera was saying Baba's name, and she started to cry. And Virginia said, Mehera, she said, now, you're sitting here crying at just the mention of Baba's name. And she said, and you spent your whole life with him since you were very young. And she said, and you're telling this story, and the people sitting here haven't been with Meher Baba for 1 second. Not 1 second. And Mehera was so shocked by this. I mean, shocked means. And after that, she changed. And she would talk about Baba without crying. And it really called upon her, how brave she was, and how much she wanted to try for Baba. And it changed a lot. And afterwards I said to Virginia, how could you say that to Mehera? And Virginia kind of looked down and she said, oh, you don't understand. And then she went off, and then she turned back and she said, it would help her. That's why I said it. And actually, it did. The Mandali commented. I mean, Meru and Mani, it helped her. So, so that was Mehera when I first met her. And by the end, I have a little vignette of sitting at a table in Baba's house, at Baba's, you know, the big table in Baba's dining room. For some reason, I happened to be sitting there, and Khorshid was with me. And Khorshid and Mehera were old time. They'd been friends for the beginning of their discipleship, really. I mean, with Baba. They were friends from childhood. And Khorshid was very, very relaxed with Mehera, of course, old friend, and Mehera with Khorshid. So on this particular day, this is 20 years down the line from when I first met Mehera, or 19. Mehera's washing her hands over at the sink at Meherazat, and Khorshid is sitting there at the table, and I was there too. And Khorshid suddenly said, Khorshid was famous for having these very significant dreams from when she was a child. She had very significant dreams. And after Baba dropped his body, Khorshid had lots of dreams of Baba, and she wouldn't tell them to Mehera because it would make Mehera sad, because Mehera didn't get dreams like that. Anyway, so Khorshid wouldn't do that. But on this day, Mehera said, Khorshid said to Mehera, who was washing her hands at the sink, Mehera, I had this most amazing dream about you last night. And Khurshid went on to describe this very meaningful, beautiful dream of hers. She would have these spiritual kind of dreams. And Khurshid wasn't the type to kid you about this kind of thing. And I was sitting there. She dreamt that Mehera, looking very beautiful, walked on the beach. There was a beach and a beautiful ocean, and Mehera started walking on the beach straight towards the ocean, and she just kept walking right into the ocean. And it was like very, and it was very significant for how beautiful it was. And Mehera is over there washing her hands. And Mehera suddenly turns to Khurshid. Mehera's standing up and Khurshid's sitting. And I'm in the mood of this beautiful dream and how significant it is. And Mehera turns to her and she says, "What are you saying, Khurshid?" She says, and she says it in English. Usually they talked in Gujarati. And she said, "You want me to just pop off?" Just pop off? Like that. And Khurshid goes, "Oops, I shouldn't have told her that dream." And Mehera used the phrase, "Oh, you want me to pop off?" And it showed Mehera at the end how much she had gone through, and also how Baba had just reinvented Mehera. And Mehera, by the end, I remember once Mani said to her, Mehera, Mani told this, and Mani told me, so I heard of it. She said, Mehera, she said, Mani said, "Isn't this enough?" It was 20 years, and it was soon before Mehera passed away, but nobody knew that. And she said, "Isn't this enough?" And Mani was so tired. And so, without Baba, 20 years, and she said, 20 years, "Isn't this enough?" And Mehera said, "Enough?" And Mehera said to Mani, "It's never enough." She said, "When we come back, are we going to have these memories? Think of our memories that we have now of our life with him." She said, "It's never enough." And Mani said later, in the beginning, I supported her, and in the end, she supported me. So after Mehera passed away, because I was there and Mehera was saying this thing about pop off, and Mehera, by the end of her time with us, Mehera would giggle all the time and she would laugh, and she had a wonderful sense of humor. And when we were going to do a play for her birthday, Mehera would act out the characters. She would dictate the play. I happened to be the screenwriter, or whatever you call it, the script writer, and Mehera would act out the parts so I could get how dramatic it was. And 3 of our plays Mehera dictated that we did for her birthday at Meherabad, and it was really, she was great in that role and she could really act, which she wouldn't show people, but she really would take on a whole character, that was amazing about her. But one thing, so she really was a very lively person, although at night she'd have her time with Baba, and that was a different world for her. But here, with us, and she was really wonderful. So one time in all of this, she passed away. After she passed away, and I saw when Mehera passed away, she had the most beautiful transformation of her face. Mani and Gohar hair. When Mehera went to Baba, they wrapped her up to prepare her for her burial, because she was going to be buried at Baba's order by one side of the samadhi. Hers was a full-on burial, not a cremation. And she looked so beautiful. I mean, I remember because Jeff Wolverton was there at the time, and the transformation of her face, which was wrapped up so beautifully, and she was on her bed for a long time because they were going to prepare, you know, her, near the samadhi, her tomb, and she was kept then in Mandali Hall for people to come and see her before she was, you know, cremated, put there in Baba's, in the shrine next to Baba's samadhi. She got more and more and more beautiful. I mean, the wrinkles, you know, that happen to people, hey, I've got them. You know, as they get older, they all just vanished. And she had this gold, this pink scarf around her face. And she had these her face was so beautiful. And that night in that Mandali Hall, when they were keeping her there at Meherazad, until the next morning when she would be, you know, put in the shrine at the samadhi, I remember looking at her and thinking, wait a minute, now I know. This is like midnight of that night. I thought, now I know Baba took her as his consort. It's because she's the most beautiful woman in the world. And I said it to myself. It was like I suddenly realized this was why. And I meant it literally. Not in terms of her spirit, not in terms of her love, not in terms of any of those things. She was literally the most beautiful woman in the world. And it came into my head just for a second, Greta Garbo? Oh, forget it. Nothing. I mean, she was so beautiful. And I remember Jeff Wolverton said he was there. And he saw her, of course, in that state with that face. And he said, it's a natural phenomena, Jeff said. It was like, I mean, a miracle. It was a phenomenon that a person at her age, 82, would, you know, look like this. And you can't describe how beautiful she was and how the turnaround was so incredible. And I remember, you know, thinking Mehera had told Mani and the other women, and Goher and Meru and all, don't when I go, don't take pictures of me. Promise you won't take photographs of me. I don't want to be remembered that way. And I remember at that time, Goher whispered to Mani, who was in the hall, she said, if she had known how she looks now, she would have loved to have a photo. But Mani said, but we promised her. And Goher says, I know, we won't take her picture. And anyway, so when I saw Mehera's, it changed her face so much. She was so elated. She was so happy. She was, happy's the wrong word, full of joy and triumph. And I can't even describe what she looked like. And I remember at that time thinking, oh, all this time, I mean, it took me a while to get over our own grief and all that happened, you know, what happens. But at that time, she just is so enchanting, you can't think of anything. But eventually we got over our own grief, and I thought to myself, oh, all these years with us, when I thought she was so happy, she wasn't happy. I saw her happy when I saw her now. I mean, you know, that time, I I thought she was happy. And it made me so sad that Mehera was 20 years not happy. And I finally blurted out to Meru. I said, Meru, you know, was Mehera ever happy from after Baba dropped his body? Because we all thought she was, and Meru said, of course she was happy. She was happy in all those years. Not at first, but yes, she was. And she said, Baba never wanted Mehera to be unhappy. Always, always. And after this, you saw her, and he made it possible that she was happy. So that was a great heart, you know, that helped me so much. When we talk about our daily life, Mehera's humility was also something. And she was, I remember in the earlier years, she came up to me once in Baba's garden at Meherana. She just walked up to me, and there were very few people around, I don't think anyone, and I was in the garden and approaching towards the porch, and Mehera was in the garden, and she came up to me and she took hold of both my arms, and she looked at me like a little child, and she said, do you think I will be born into a Baba family in my next life? I mean, can you imagine? From Mehera, I get asked this question. And I'm thinking to myself, born to a Baba family? I said, in my world, that's bottom line. You know, for me, no way. That's not going to happen. What? And her humility. And I said to her, I looked at her and she really, a real question. And I said, Mehera, I don't think you have to worry about that. And she looked at me and she said, Money said the same thing. And she walked off. But that was her humility. When you're queen of the universe and you have that kind of humility, that was who the Mandali were. You know, there were other things, you know, about her that really brings out all these things about her as a human. And one of them that really impressed me was when Naja passed away. You know, Naja, Baba's cousin, who was the cook there. And Mehera knew Naja from, again, when she was very, very young in Pune. And Naja lived very near Baba's house. And so Mehera would go over to Naja's and they would have little artis and all these things about Baba. And they were like girls together, really. And when Naja passed away, you know, in our time, you know, at Meherana, Mehera came to her funeral, you know, and she was so close to Naja. But I remember I was cleaning out the Rahuri cabin because we were going to put Naja's form in Rahuri cabin before she was going to be cremated. Yeah, she was cremated. So I was cleaning it and I just felt like that was what a life she had, and our lives are just shadows. And I had this feeling of this amazing, what it was to be Baba's cousin and to serve him as Naja did. And I was all into all this, and it was really true for me. So, and I knew that Mehera lived only for Baba. You know, she didn't pay attention to anybody else. I mean, Mehera was Mehera, you know, and she was just there for Baba. And so when the car came up near the cabin of the women Mandali, and I looked and I went to open the door for Mehera because she was sitting there. I looked through the window and I saw Mehera's face. And it brought me down from my whole world of, oh, what a life for Naja. Just like that, because there on Mehera's face was such grief at the loss of her friend. And I never imagined that to that level, Mehera could love someone as a human, as a friend who wasn't her Baba, you know. And it showed me to what extent Mehera was a human, that she would grieve her friend like that. So that was really a shock for me, and it really made me understand these people, these mandali, are human. So that was something. One thing, you know, we had a lot of fun with Mehera, and I don't know how long I've been talking. Okay, anyway, we had a lot of fun with Mehera. I mean, Mehera was really fun. And she would, like, once I remember I was coming into the dining room with Mehera, and she has this little bean, and she looks outside, and there's a vine growing up outside of the dining room at Mehera's, and she's looking at this little bean, and she said, I'm not supposed to plant anything else. She said, because we've already using up, because there's no water, and she said, but I think I'm just gonna stick in this bean. So we went outside, and sure enough, Mehera, and we look around, you know, I don't know, it was like a sneak. We look around, and then nobody's there, and Mehera like this, and then I helped, and then we planted the bean with the hopes that it would be one of those bean vines, you know, that come up. That's the way they grow. And it was really fun. And it showed me Mehera's love for nature and her innocence, you know, and how we sneaked out. It was really funny. And she loved nature to an extent that I really, you know, she loved big animals. She loved horses, and she rode horses, and she loved dogs that were big, not just little poodles. She wasn't that type, you know. And Peter and Mastan, of course, and she loved animals and birds and even cats, although cats went after birds, so that kind of took them out of Meherana. But, you know, so in that sense, she loved nature, and we'd go down and look at the turtle in the well there, and we'd go by these board trees and pick off the fruits and eat them. I once went on a walk with her where we were just going to the board trees, and, you know, and we were just like, it was amazing. And once we were sitting around, and there was a person there who really revered her very much at the table. And, you know, Mehera was like the queen, and Mehera acted the role beautifully, and she'd stand up, and everyone would stand up, and Mehera maybe just stood up to, you know, look out the window or something. Oh no, everyone would stand up, and these are pilgrims. And once, after all that was happening, everyone went out, Meherana, she plays the queen so beautifully, everyone goes out, and Mehera looked at me, and she's done this with other of the girls too. This wasn't just me, but I happened to be the one that time. And she said, couldn't we just be girls? And we went into her room, and all these people were out onto the veranda to greet the queen, and we went into her room. And I mean, I didn't arrange it, but, and she just, and I sat on this, she tells me, sit on the stool, and she sits on her bed, and she shows me little things that she's found in a little book or something. I mean, it's just for a few minutes, and then Meru comes in and says, Mehera, pilgrims are waiting on the porch. So that was, but what I mean is, couldn't we just be girls? That was also her humility. So, okay, now I'm about to go into something else. So one thing that Mehera also said that I love to remember, which was when something really extreme happened to them, maybe it was the new life, or I can't remember, but Mehera was describing it, and it was some kind of drastic change in their lives, and it wasn't an easy thing to swallow. But Mehera said, Baba liked, and I said, well, what was that like for you, Mehera? And Mehera kind of giggled, and she said, Baba liked giving you a surprise. And I'll tell you, so I think of COVID right now as a surprise. We're in the middle of a surprise, one of Baba's surprises. And it also reminded me that we're in lockdown here in India, as you have been in the West, of course, and certainly now in India, major lockdown. And I remember Mani talking about those early days for them when you have to store up on things, on food, and get extra dal and extra rice and all that. And Mani would talk about, before COVID, of course she wasn't, earlier on I'm thinking, when Mani would talk about the life they lived up the hill, you know, and there was a phase where they had for lunch, they'd have rice and dal, and for dinner, they'd have something different, Mani would say, dal and rice. So you could have rice and dal, and then you'd have something different, which was dal and rice. So, but it made me think of the times when those women were here, all the women, and talk about lockdown, you know, they were really locked down, and for years, you know, years. And that kind of cloistered life and what they could and couldn't do, and they all slept in this big room, 6 of them. I'm thinking of those mandali, the initial women mandali on the hill. And they could go out only to go through this little bamboo, it's like a tunnel sort of, to get to where they ate. And then they'd come walking back into the room. Or when Baba was there, they could play badminton or, you know, ping pong or something that Baba set up, but all in that little tiny space. There was no question of walking around. There was no question of ordering, you know, food. There was no question of takeout. There was none of that. On that kind of lockdown that went on for years, I think we have no idea. I don't, of what that was like. So when I talk about lockdown here, you know, I realize no idea. So that was, anyway, the mandali. Now, one more thing I'm going to talk, now I think I've talked a lot. I don't really know when 50 minutes is going to be up. That's what Ralph told me. But I have a few other things I want to say, in case I'm not in enough time. Anyway, when we first, so it was through Mani and Erich that we moved in to stay at Meherabad. Those days I mentioned in and out were very early ones, but in 1976 we came to stay at Meherabad, and the person who was sort of ruling all of that world was Padri. And Mani and Erich called Eriko and I into Erich's room, and we were specially called, and they told us, because there was no night watchman here at that time, the old night watchman had retired and they needed a night watchman, so they selected Eriko, you know. They'd known us a bit, and they told us that we had to move to Meherabad, and Eric was going to be the watchman on the hill if he would accept it, because he was working so that we could have money to live here. And Erika was really delighted, but Mani and Erich said, but you can go stay at Meherabad, but you have to get along with Padri. If you don't get along with Padri, you are out. And Mani repeated, don't get along with Padri, you're out. There's no question. So when we first went to live at Meherabad, we were tiptoeing around Padri, and Padri was really strict, you know, we didn't, but he turned out to be so amazing, and we ended up just doting on Padri, which he didn't like either. So we learned many things from him. We lived with him for 6 years, or he was at Meherabad, we were in the same hall, big. Mundley Hall area at Meherana, and we learned a lot about him, and he was really quite amazing. But also living there was Muhammad Must. So we also had to be good with Muhammad Must, who we didn't know anything about, and suddenly we're living right next door to a Must. But Eric is doing, when we walked into our room, we were given half a room, this is Padri, half a room with something dividing it from the other half, but that, whatever was dividing the rooms, it went up to the top. I mean, it did not go to the top. So we were half, and then there was a clear way to hear whatever was happening on the other side of half a room. So we lived in that for about 10 years. That was our initial time. And there were no beds, except for Goher at Meherazad, knew Padri, and she got Dr. Alu, who lived nearby there was a TB sanatorium. She got 2 beds from Dr. Alu, and they were put into our room. So they were beds. I mean, at least we had beds. Whereas when Ted walked into his room, and he was there 6 months before, he had no bed. Alan had no bed and a collapsing roof. Oh yeah, all this was, you had to kind of go for it if you were gonna stay there. And I remember what Padri's idea of, getting up in time was he'd be walking by to go to his kitchen early in the morning, say about 5:15, and he'd bang on the window when he walked by of where we were staying. Only Eric was up the hill. He'd bang on the window and it would make you sit up bolt upright. You were sound asleep, bang. Because then you'd be like, and you'd hear Padri, make cha. And cha was his way of saying chai, because Eric was coming down from the hill and the tea had to be there. So I would make cha and leap out of bed. That was Padri's idea of getting you up. It's not just an alarm or that, no question. So bang. And then in the beginning, I thought, oh, this is fun. So I went out, and Padri would use the same sink as I would. And so I went out, of course, to wash my face and brush my teeth. Now, Padri was using that sink, so I'd wait for him. And then, so I brought out my brush, and I got out my toothpaste, and I started brushing my teeth sitting down. And Padri, because now it was my turn to go to the sink, and Padri turns around, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Who are you?" He says, a duchess? Because I was sitting down brushing my teeth. "Who are you? A duchess?" And I go, "Oh, no, sorry, Cock." And I went over and washed my face, washed my teeth. That was kind of Padri's style, but he was fantastic. He was just, and the atmosphere around him, and he was just a wonderful thing. And, I remember too, once, and I haven't told this before because it was personal, but anyway, I'll tell it. I was in India when I got an aerogram from my grandmother telling me that my mother had passed away. And it was a very tragic way. She died, and I was so startled. And you get this from my grandmother. I mean, she didn't know about cable. She was the mother of my mother, so it was not easy for her either. So I was kind of, really in shock. And so I remember I was in my room I just stayed in my room. I said, don't go out and make a big scene of this, and just stay in this room. And I closed the doors, and Erica came, and we went up the hill first to Baba's Samadhi and all that. And then I came back down, and I was just, stayed in my room because I didn't want to go out and sob and all that. But I mean, it was a big shock for me. So I think it was the second day that I was in the room, and I was really kind of sinking. I mean, the room was dark. I just stayed on my bed and tried not to make a scene and just stay inside and cry and whatever. And I started going down with this news. And all of a sudden, I hear this pounding on the door. Pounding. And it has to be Padri. No one else would pound on those doors like that. So I went up and I opened the door, just kind of hesitant, wiping my eyes and looking out, and Padri says to me, "Do you know how to make an omelet?" I got to tell Padri, I mean, he wasn't the type that you turned away from, and I said, "Do you know how to make an omelet?" And I said, "Yes, Kaka." "Well, tell me how you make it." I said, "Well, making an omelet. Can you imagine having to think about making an omelet when you're in the depths of despair?" And I was like, And so I said, "Well, you need some eggs, okay? You beat them up, and if you have butter, it's good, or oil, and then you need sort of a frying pan." And he goes, "All right, then, and finally I managed, and then I said, "And you turn them over, and you do," and he goes, "And then basically it's an omelet. And then what do you do with it?" "Well, you get a plate, and then you get it out of the pan. And then you eat it, and then you eat it." "Okay." And he walks off. But by that time, having to use my brain, I can't even, this is Meher Baba. He just reached down and got me up out of where I was. And I know perfectly well, Padri didn't care about making an omelet. He probably knew himself, he was a great cook. But it was Baba's way. That's how the mandali could help. That was amazing. Now, I don't know what else is of interest here. I do have something that I do want to say. I've got other things to talk about, the office and how funny Pot Erich was and money was and all of that. But it's in a book I wrote about money, so that's already there. But I want to tell you something that the mandali, I had an idea to ask the mandali, what were Baba's characteristics? So I went to Mehera first. I don't know. I said, I'll ask Mehera. And I said, "Mehera, what would you describe as Baba's characteristics?" And I think people get what that is. And Mehera said, "Oh, he was very sporting. He was sporting." And it took me a minute to get what sporting was. And she said, could see I was a little puzzled, and she said, he was up for anything. And you'd suggest something to Baba, and he'd do it. And it was a beautiful, she said, he was up for anything. And it was such a wonderful description of Baba that I never would have thought of. And she said it in such a light way that it was fun things, he'd do. And he'd take something beyond where it was going to go and make it funny or make it, it was a very beautiful way of describing Baba in a way I had never thought of him, and from Mehera, of all people. So when I asked Adi Senior, what do you think, Adi, was one of Baba's characteristics? Or we called him Adi Kaka. What do you think? Adi Kaka was one of Baba's characteristics. And Adi said, he got this kind of look on his face, kind of a stern look, and he said, he was a master psychologist, which means he could get where people were, and, he could, Money said he could conduct an orchestra in the way that he could get people to do things, and a master psychologist, which I thought was interesting, very interesting. And then the last one I remember was I asked Erich, what do you think was Baba's characteristic to Erich, And Erich said, he looked kind of sad when he said this, and he said, he was too compassionate. And I said, too compassionate? Too compassionate. And Erich saw that all his life of Baba suffering for people to help them, even though they wouldn't pay attention, how he saw that from Baba's side, of course, or from Erich's side. Too compassionate. Very interesting. Now, I think I'm almost done. Am I done? I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to, I want to talk about things that I heard from the Mandali that were worth hearing and that I've never forgotten. And one of them was Nanakare. Do you all remember Nanakare? And Mansari on Meherabad Hill. And neither of them were married, obviously. But when Eric and I came, or when Eric and I were married and came, I remember Nana and Mansari right off told us, because we were new at this story of being married, and they said, whenever you have a fight, they said, if before you go to bed you have a fight, you always have to say Jai Baba. Every night that you go to sleep, whether you have a fight or not, you have to say Jai Baba to each other. And it seemed like, oh, easy, no problem. But I'll tell you, when you have a fight with the person you're married to, and then you have to say Jai Baba before you go to sleep, that is not the best way. But we did it because we had Nana and Mansari in our head, and it was really, it was a very, very useful and significant thing, and very worth remembering for me and Eric. We did it. And then another thing is, I'm sitting here at Meherabad, and I remember early years here, I would get very picky about who came, because we had some pilgrims who were a little bit on their own, following their own line of thought, like walk around in your nightgown, early in the morning, or go up to the Samadhi for Arti, Baba's Samadhi, wrapped in a blanket and, your slip, or, that kind of person would come. And I remember one of them who we decided was really a little bit out there, was walking in front of us. She was better dressed, I think, at the time. I've never heard of her since that. But she was walking in front of us at Lower Meherabad, and I was sitting with Padri, maybe other people there, don't remember. And we were sitting on this bench in front of Baba's hall at Meherabad. And we were sitting there, and Padri was maybe smoking and looking up, or had his feet up on something, I don't know. So we're sitting on this bench, and Padri, we're watching it. This woman walked by that I was describing, and I said in a very kind of, arrogant way, oh, and she was really off, I'll tell you. I mean, not off, but by my standards, picky. And she went walking by, and I said to Padri, I murmured, there's an idiot. And Padri looked at me. The woman went on, and Padri turned and he looked at me, and he said in this very stern voice, no one sets foot in Meherabad without lifetimes of service and longing. I went, that one, hard to forget. And Mani, Mani said something really beautiful about some people who she heard of, who came into Baba's contact, or recently come here and been a pilgrim, and then they kind of drifted off and they went some other way, and very noticeably. And Mani said, we said, Mani, what do you think about that? And Mani said, what could she do? It wasn't in her suitcase. And we said, her suitcase? And Mani said, yes, her suitcase. It was packed in her last life, she said. So when she opened it this life, this wasn't there. She said, so I just say that, since we're talking about the suitcase, she said, basically, be very careful what you pack in this life, because you're going to open it in your next life, and there it will be. So that I thought was a really meaningful thing, you know, thinking, oh, what am I packing in my suitcase? And another thing that Mani said that was meaningful for us who were at that time serving Baba under the mandali, or serving, we hoped, Baba or ourselves or whatever we were doing. Mani was very, you know, and Mani, Baba called her his true sister in service. Baba said in the Myrtle Beach Center, Baba told, you know, people there, Mani, first he talked of Mehera, his beloved, and then he talked of Mani. She is my true sister in service. And so Mani was service, you know, major. If you knew her and watched her, she was all on service, you know. A bunch of us were trying to help her in the office, but she stayed longer, she tried harder, she was it. She was service without hint of self, and that was really amazing. But one day, she said to me, and I know she said it to other people too, she said to me, because I was rushing around and had to do this and I had to do that, and I was running off to do that or something, Mani said to me, don't lose him in your service to him. Many have fallen by that way. So it was very meaningful, of course. Don't lose him in your service to him. Many have fallen by that way. And Mani also talked something that was really amazing. She talked about what the Kabir writes, what Ram says. He was talking about Ram, the avatar, Ram, and he said, loot. She said, loot the name of Ram while you can. This is like the spring. Loot the name of Ram while you can, not Raman. Loot the name of Ram while you can, you know, and it was just, and Mani would say that, and then she'd say, I haven't quoted it exactly, but it was Kabir, and it was about looting the name of Ram. And Mani quoted that, and Baba, you know, Ram, Baba. And she said something very beautiful. She said, think of this now, it's the spring. It's the springtide. And she said, we're in an orchard full of apples. She said, and they're lying ripe on the ground, on the trees. All those are Baba's name. And she said, take them, catch them, loot them, she said, because in time, it will not be that way. It will be summer, and then they will be destroyed, and then it will winter, and you won't have them. She said, so now is the time to loot Baba's name. So I thought that was a beautiful thing. And once I was on the veranda, this is another little thing to remember for me. Once I was on the veranda and somebody was saying, oh, how is it we love Baba? And Mehera was quite, she turned, she says, you love Baba because Baba loves you. It's like, there's no question of whether you love Baba because Baba loves you. And it was interesting because in the same way, we were, we wondered, oh, we didn't meet him in our last life. And what are we doing here now? And Mehera said, where do you think you were in your last life? She was startled that this is in early times with meeting her. She was startled that we would think that we weren't with him. Well, we said, how could we be here today? And she said, what? Where do you think you were in your last life? It's like, Mehera was like, get with it. And it made me happy that obviously we must have met him in our last life. And there's two other things I wanted to say that Meheru said. One is we were talking about being here, being with Baba, and Meheru said she thought about it very carefully, and it's particularly in this time, I think, when there's a lot of distance between here, Meherabad or the center, or of course Meherazad, or all of us and him, and locked down and you can't go anywhere and all those things. And so, how to stay, close with him. And Meheru said once, because we were asking about how we could stay here, and Meheru said, you have to want it enough, and you have to try enough, which for me was very meaningful. You have to want it enough, and you have to try enough. So that was sort of a wake-up for me. And I want to say, this is my last sentence, I want to say that I once went to Erich because there was some difficulty here and times were changing and it didn't look like I remembered, and oh, what about the old days with the mandali, and it was a different kind of thing then, and Meherabad, the whole atmosphere has changed, and nowadays, it's so true, the atmosphere is changing. To Erich, and Erich looked at me. We had a private little meeting because I wanted to tell him about this. And Erich said to me, he said, become the custodian of that atmosphere in your heart. So, Jai Baba. Have a good time at Meherana. It's full of fun.